Welcome to Therapy, Coaching, and Dreams. I'm D. Kelley, and I'm here with my co-host, Jim Shalley. We're a coach and a therapist who love talking about how inner work can help you with more awareness, purpose, and freedom. Welcome to the show. Welcome, everyone. Today we're talking about ways to understand our personality. There are numerous approaches to doing that, and there are several theories that dominate the landscape. One that has been around for a while in various forms is the Enneagram, which proposes 9 different styles or patterns for how a person interacts with people and circumstances. A more recent approach is internal family systems theory, which proposes multiple parts or personalities of an individual, which influence and manage a person's interaction with the world and with one's internal life. Several theories have roots in Jungian psychology, which is what we're going to look at today. This is an approach that we mention often, and both of us use in our respective therapy and coaching practices. At its core, this approach uses 2 dimensions. The first is how energy guides a person, whether that energy is primarily focused on action or movement, which you refer to as a dynamic approach, or if that energy is more attentive to stabilizing the environment or situation, which is typically referred to as a static energy. So, Jim, explain for us. A person comes to you, they're in a very responsible position vocationally. I don't know if they're a CEO, a surgeon, or whatever the role is that they might have, but they find that they are often in conflict and they've come to you for help. What would be the difference between a dynamic personality style and a static personality style in regard to conflict or how somebody handles conflict?
A great question. Initially, I would almost immediately diagnose a CEO that comes to me for therapy as a dynamic personality. And the advantage of a dynamic personality is they come in pretty purposeful. They've had a conflict at work. They've had something at home happen, something that kind of motivated them to say, okay, I need to do something about this. That dynamic approach, typically they'll take suggestions, they'll take advice, and they will usually implement.
Mm.
A static personality will come into therapy, and oftentimes they'll not understand what has happened or what the problem is because they are so static in their approach to life, which means basically that they stabilize things. They just bring things into their lives and they kind of bring order to them, and they don't like a lot of change. All of that affects how they approach their issues. And whereas a dynamic personality will come in and say, okay, what do I need to do here? Now, the downside of a dynamic personality would be that they go in wholeheartedly with the suggestions you give them. And so they need to be tempered a little bit. Whereas a static personality will come in and try to discuss how many different ways we could do something before they actually do something. So again, it sounds like one's positive, one's negative. They're just really different expressions, like you described, of how we handle our lives.
There is a phrase in business that is sometimes used called the paralysis of analysis.
Right.
I'm assuming that that's in some ways what you're describing with a more static or stabilizing energy is that they want to analyze and then analyze again to make sure that they're not missing anything before they move forward. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So, then, and again, I know you deal with what's presented to you, but what would cause a person who has a very dynamic energy to enter into conflict? And tied with that, are they sometimes the last one to know that there's conflict as they move forward? And what kind of conflict or ways by which a person who is more static in their energy might they enter into conflict in the workforce or in the home?
One of the challenges for the dynamic personality type, unfortunately, oftentimes they'll come into therapy because they are dynamic. In other words, to use the extreme example, they've had an affair where they're unhappy somewhere in their life, but they can't put a finger on it. They meet someone at the wrong time and they engage in an affair. So typically that brings them into therapy because of the very dynamic personality that they have. And so that's the downside of the dynamic personality. They can bring situations that have to be dealt with because they keep moving. On the other hand, a static personality oftentimes will cause therapy to happen because they have not moved much. They haven't grown much. They haven't understood some of the nuances of relationship, and they'll be frustrated because typically my husband always wants to do this. I have no interest in doing that, so it starts to cause tension in the relationship from that perspective. But yeah, what causes a static personality to go into therapy typically is unhappiness. Whereas a dynamic personality will come into therapy because they've screwed something up, if I had to put it pretty casually.
And they're looking for somebody to help them fix it quickly and move forward.
Right.
Yeah.
In
It,
fact, dynamic personality will oftentimes be frustrated with the process, especially if it's a couples counseling where they've messed up and they'll not want to talk about it anymore. They just want to keep moving forward. The static personality will want to talk about it all the time and will bring it up over and over again. The one challenge I have for dynamic personality is to use that style by on purpose, occasionally, without any prompting, bring up what they did that causes the injury in the relationship. And for a dynamic personality, that's counterintuitive. Why would I do that? It's like that's going to cause an argument. And typically the other partner will almost always say it addresses my hurt and addresses her. Typically it's the woman, but oftentimes it's the man too. It addresses that static part that wants to know that it affected me and hurt me. And that's the interesting part as far as the static personality will oftentimes hold on to something because the dynamic personality won't acknowledge it enough.
mm, wow. So let me, you've already started to hint at this, but let me ask you to carry it a little bit further. We often talk about the importance of being able to access different parts of who we are. So if a person who has a very strong dynamic energy, which can be incredibly charismatic and attractive because uh, they're the energy that pushes the cart forward, that people
Absolutely.
kind of
Yep.
join in and hang on to that. But when there is too much of that in a person's life, what will they miss out on if they are not aware of another part of themselves that would benefit from a more balanced approach?
Well, the phrase really is stop and smell the roses. Dynamic personalities, they may cut the rose off and then send it to somebody as a token of something, but they won't stop and necessarily smell the rose. uh, yeah, I mean, I have a client right now that uh, they want to go on vacation and just sit at the beach. The man never sits still. That's like torture. And so I'm trying to work out a negotiation to where one vacation or a few days of a vacation, they'll sit and just, stare at the ocean or whatever, whatever he thinks
Let
is
me guess
gonna
what type you are in this.
happen. Yeah. So that's always fascinating to me because, uh, you have to get in touch with the other side of yourself. And so I asked that gentleman, it was the man that wants to sightsee basically. And he said, why would I do that? I said, well, because in your silence and just reflecting on things, what would you think about? And again, that's where the dynamic personality goes, well, I'd probably come up with a new business plan or some way to improve something here or something there. I said, yeah, you want to keep moving even in your brain. I said, so you could do that. You could read a book. You could do things like that that have movement to them. But typically, uh, I said, the other person will go along with you when you do all these fun things, but they'll be exhausted at the end of the day, and you'll be surprised, like, "That was great, wasn't it?" And the static personality will often goes, Yeah, that was really good. Can we just sit tomorrow?"
Okay, so then help me with this, Jim, because one of the things that you don't want is for somebody to lose that enjoyment of life, the satisfaction that comes with living into that part of their journey. It sounds like you are asking somebody to actually put that on hold as opposed to inviting them, and this is, I guess, just from my perspective, but inviting them into a space that will actually expand their appreciation for a different way to see the world, a different perspective. So help me to understand, what is the upside for somebody who has a strong dynamic energy to tap into that part, as opposed to just a better relationship. Okay, I'm doing this to please my partner, or I'm doing this to please my coworker, but is there any satisfaction that comes from that?
Well, the uh, thing I recommend for really strong dynamic personalities, I had a guy recently that came in, and he's really dynamic. He's all over the world doing all these things, and I was exhausted listening to him, but he was always moving. He said, "So what you're describing is, if I were to slow down, how would I do that?" And I said, "Do you have a deck?" He goes, "Well, yeah." I said, "Okay, on your deck, if you set out on your deck," I said, Are there trees around?" He said, "Yes, there are trees." I said, "So then you start identifying with what that tree is. You start looking at the animals, the birds that might be flying." I said, "You start focusing on the nature around you, so you get in touch with a different aspect of yourself. Even if it is a little bit dynamic of identifying things, it still gets you in the moment." And I think for the dynamic personality, the moment is to manipulate, not to be in. So to your point, is there value in that? I absolutely think there is, because almost always those people are in relationship with a static personality. And I will always say, look at the attraction. The attraction tells you what part of you may need to develop. And for a static personality, they're typically in relationship with a dynamic personality. So what's that balance look like?
That's real helpful. I think that I have found that those who have a very, very strong dynamic side to their journey and follow that dynamic energy, that they often are reluctant to do much inner work because they find such great success in the outer expression of the dynamic energy. So at some point in time, there is a recognition of, yeah, I see all of these things externally, but trying to draw somebody into seeing the color of life in a different way, the inward journey and what it might bring. For example, being attracted to somebody who's very musical. Maybe they're not dynamic in other ways, but that musical or artistic side. Um, or the joy that comes with nurturing and compassionate work. But more particularly, inwardly focusing is what I think you were trying to get to when you say sit on the deck, get in touch with nature, but get in touch with what nature does to that which is inside of you, and start feeling the feelings of success or disappointment, the feelings of joy or the feelings of frustration, and what that tells you about yourself.
Yeah, the feeling level does slow us down. And that's why I said earlier that, fortunately or unfortunately, it works out. Usually the dynamic personality causes some type of trauma. That trauma then gets their attention, and then they begin to investigate their feeling level. And sometimes they just want a symptom relief. So just help me feel better. So if there's a broken relationship, oftentimes they'll jump right into another relationship, and they don't take advantage of what I think the universe is trying to tell them, which is to slow down and examine your inner life. Uh, Fortunately, I've had several men that they've caused great pain, but they've also been able to really take a look internally. But that still is difficult for them because they want an answer. And yet the answer within is to understand themselves better and how they interact and just what the feelings are trying to tell them. And that's really challenging sometimes but if they get a glimpse of it, they really can grow it.
Mm, I like that. Yeah, I think that when there is a reward or some sense of gratification when they have a new idea or a new way of looking at themselves or the world, that becomes enticing to keep going to that place again and again. Let's take the other posture of that. When there's too much of the static energy, because static energy or stabilizing energy is in many ways what makes the world function in a
Mhm.
reasonable way.
Right.
Or at least helping to make it function for more people, more circumstances, as those who have that stabilizing energy organize the world and try and create systems for it. So if there's too much of that, what is that person missing out on that you hope to give them a glimpse of what it might look like if they weren't so dominated by a stabilizing or static energy?
Uh, they're caught up in being super responsible. And so they err on the side of responsibility being the most important thing. Why would you even think of riding a motorcycle? You have 3 kids. That's
That's a great example.
that's the extreme, because typically that they'll be married to a static personality who will basically say, "Why would you even think to do that?" Whereas if you can get a static personality on the back of a motorcycle once, they'll love it, but that doesn't mean they'll go jump on a motorcycle again. They enjoyed the experience, but they had to be talked into it. So I think that's where the strength is order and predictability and, what a child needs until age 5 or 6. It's absolutely crucial. The downside is it becomes so rigid that you can't move beyond that. And, it's like in parenting, the mother may do great until age 3 or 4. The father then kicks in and begins to expand the risk-taking oftentimes, or I would say in our framework, the masculine, because sometimes women will do the same thing and some men are more passive in that sense. Uh, but yeah, the static personality, super responsible to the extreme, they can become pretty judgmental and ask the question, "Why would you do that?" My mother was famous for wanting to know why I would build way back in the woods, the house that I have in the woods, because why would you do that? Well, because that's where I want it. But it made no sense. She said, well, people can't even see the house if you build it out by the pond. Anyway, just an interesting approach to how people's, their filters drive them. And so it makes perfect sense to do it the way it's supposed to be done. Because again, the static personality has a strong should voice. Life should be a certain way, and there's truth to that. Knowing when to lighten up and let it become broader is the same way a dynamic personality needs to use the value of the static to know when to be more responsible and not act out impulsively with some things that you may wanna do. And again, the classic thing is, should I ride a motorcycle? Should I skydive? Should I do any of these risky things if I, have a family? Now, the integrated self, will almost always balance that out naturally. If there's typically, it's the I don't wanna sound too gender specific, but if there's a woman who's static, who trusts her husband with the kids, they will let them do risky behaviors, and that's such life-giving, especially for, I would say, the masculine or the boys, for having both parents embrace the risk-taking. And in my mind, that's the balance because I can only trust that if I'm the feminine or if I'm the stabilizer, if the dynamic is responsible to the point that makes sense. So we're not gonna go out and ride a dirt bike with no helmet or no protection or no padding. That's the compromise. That's the dance.
And that whole notion of healthy or balanced applies to all of the things we talk about. Like, is it a healthy dynamic energy? Is it a healthy stabilizing or static energy? Is it a healthy masculine energy? Is it a healthy feminine energy? That I think we have within us, um, probably driven often unconsciously, but a sense when something doesn't seem balanced, when it seems dangerous, when it seems
Right.
overly restrictive, or whatever the case might be. And we react in relationship to that, often reacting out of the unconscious. But if we bring those thoughts further to the surface, we'll be able to articulate why it seems unsafe or why we have the concern.
Right. So when you, in your dream work, how would it be expressed in a dream? That that dance of would a dream expose where one is lacking or overcompensating?
It comes out in a variety of ways. It can sometimes come out in a plot line, where you have certain things that happen within a dream that make you incredibly uncomfortable, or things in a dream that you're automatically attracted to. And sometimes those plot lines can give you an indicator of where you fall on this spectrum. It also comes out in the gender mix of the dream. There are times when somebody will come and every character in the dream will be a masculine image. And so the question then is, what is that masculine side trying to draw you to? What is the story behind a complete absence of any feminine voice in this dream? And what's going on in your life right now that might create that kind of an imagery that got your attention? So yeah, it comes out in a variety of ways, but often the plot line or the action that's taking place will sometimes describe a dynamic versus static energy in what's happening. I had a couple one time that came in, and in this particular situation, the male was described by both of them as being the one who was spontaneous, wanted to do things in the in the moment, and just with very little notice to say, "Hey, let's do this for the weekend," or "Let's do this particular thing." And in this particular case, the spouse, the wife, was the one who was incredibly responsible, took care of the family budget, was very aware of the obligations and commitments they have. And they followed a very typical pattern. And that is that the person who was spontaneous, wanting to model for their spouse how great that is, would propose even more spontaneous things and was trying to live and show them how wonderful that is. And the woman in this case, the more static energy, was forced to move to even more polarized position of who's going to take responsibility for all of
Yep.
these things, these bills. And they just distanced themselves more and more because they thought that it would model well for their partner. I um, looked at the woman and I said to her, "Can I just ask, what would it feel like to you if you knew that your partner was being responsible and you had the opportunity for one of these
Yep, that's
occasions
a
to
great
be the spontaneous one?"
Yep.
And her response was, "Oh my goodness, it would be the greatest day in my life to be able to be the one who initiated spontaneity. But how can I? Because he's not taking responsibility for anything."
And that's a whole different conversation because what is missing is the validation piece.
Yes.
They can't hear me at all unless I validate their view and how important it is to them. So you're right. They go to the polar opposites. Well, wait a minute. Let me show you how much fun this is. No, nope. I'm going to show you how you're going to die if you do that.
Or I'm
It's
going to show you how we're going to be kicked out of our apartment because we don't have enough money because you're saying, let's spontaneously go this weekend to Aruba.
it's it's so true. It's so true. It's like, and that's why, Oprah 100 years ago came out with the most important aspect of any relationship is validation. And there's some truth in that. Until I can see the world through your eyes and appreciate that, which is mutual respect. As soon as you lose mutual respect, It's pretty tough to get it back. But the way you do that is by saying, "Wow, you're pretty static. You're pretty." My term is it's kind of sounds negative, but it really isn't fear based in the sense that I'm aware of the bad things that could happen if you do that. Uh, I'm not nearly aware of those. just, just personally,
Yeah.
I will do stuff, and then if there's a consequence, I'll pay my way out of it, or I'll do something like yes, like I should have thought that through.
Yeah. Yeah. And the approach that is sometimes taken is, well, I'll just apologize for it.
Yes,
And and the response is often, but the apology doesn't seem to change anything.
right.
And so until, as you just described, until you begin to see the world through the other person's perspective, a perspective, by the way, that somewhere in the unconscious you're attracted to for some
Yes,
reason.
that's my point all along. Is
Yeah.
that's why you have to look at who you're attracted to.
Yes.
Those traits, you need those traits. You just externalize them in the attraction.
Yeah. And the problems will continue until you begin to internalize the thing to which you're attracted so that you can be healthy and
Right.
live in a way that allows the others around you to live healthier as well.
Yeah, the classic example for me is you can ask your husband, and again, gender specific, husband to vacuum the carpet, and they'll vacuum the carpet, but they'll leave the vacuum in the middle of the floor for days. Or they won't pick up after themselves. That's not following through. So that's another stabilizing trait is put the vacuum cleaner away. Oh, I didn't even see it sitting there. Oh, okay. I appreciate you sweeping the floor or vacuuming the floor, but could you put it away? Yeah, that's a classic example of, and women will say, he doesn't see it. I go, no, he doesn't see that vacuum cleaner at all. It doesn't exist. He did his job. These couples are typically in their first probably 5 or 10 years of marriage where they're having those kind of discussions. But
Yeah.
to your point, it really is. Uh, and I use the phrase a lot. Look who you're attracted to. They have traits that you're supposed to internalize, not just let them live those out, because then you both become exhausted.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems to me that very often, I guess I've just seen it happen too many times. But if you don't take the time to pay attention to that which is attractive and begin to find ways to allow that part of you to be nourished and to grow, when your partner no longer responds in the way you're wanting him or her to respond, you'll find that exact same trait in somebody else, and that erotic attraction leads you to a place where you begin to compromise
Absolutely.
values, commitments, because you've not done the internal work.
Right. And that's why you often repeat the same pattern with another person. I mean, I've done this long enough to have been through, 2 or 3 people that have done that, and they end up at the same place because to your point, they haven't done the inner work.
Yeah.
Again, you're only as successful in your relationship, as you are with a relationship with yourself, as we said, I think, a couple sessions ago, and that's really the work. And from my perspective, if you can get there, the valuable part of it is you have a laboratory right in front of you
Ugh, agree completely.
with your
You,
partner.
you've been attracted to one of the individuals that could be your very best teacher.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But sometimes they have gotten in such a negative trap that no matter what the the static personality says, it's always negative. And no matter what the dynamic personality does, it's always wrong. And that's classic 15 to 25-year marriage range or relationship range where people face that dynamic. And it is really difficult to get past those judgments that they've placed. And basically, it's an internal judgment where they haven't done their own work to figure out why I'm trying to negate this person instead of embracing them because they
Yeah.
can't embrace that part of themselves.
One of the lines that I like, that's an internal message. If you can get to this point, I think it's kind of a turning point, and that is to acknowledge or confess or to say to your partner, I know that I have been oppositional for years, but I want you to know that I'm trying to shift my posture for you to be my teacher. So I'm going to start asking questions and maybe pushing you a little bit. And I want you to know it's because I want to learn. I want to learn how you see the world. I want to know what you gained from that. I want to learn from you as my teacher, as opposed to this person that I have been opposing over and over again.
Yeah. And that talk about something that fosters mutual respect when you take that approach. But I'm telling you what, it's so difficult for them to see the possibility that this person that can't stand me can teach me something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But when you do the work, the vision of life and the spectrum of your journey expands in such powerful and beautiful ways. It's worth the effort.
It does, and the interesting thing about it, if you take it seriously, you begin to see all kinds of opportunities to work on those traits. I have a lady right now who's got a very strong static personality, but she also is pretty dynamic at the same time, but her static personality is much stronger, and she's wondering why all these people in her life are doing things she can't control.
Wow.
And I go, "Well, you now open the door to having more opportunities to grow because you're gonna see them everywhere."
Yeah. Well, this seems like an appropriate place to draw closure to this particular session, just giving a heads up of where we're going from here. Next time, we're going to talk a little bit more about the differences between the feminine energy and the masculine energy, and that there is a dynamic and static side to both of those,
Right. Yeah.
and they find their expression in different ways. Eventually, we hope to get to the place where we have this great appreciation for all the various combinations of where we might fall on this spectrum and try and find some balance for our own life that makes sense for us individually. So we're going to come back to that next time. Thanks for great discussion, Jim. We'll get together again in a week.
Cool. Thanks, D.
Well, that's it for this episode of Therapy, Coaching, and Dreams. If you're enjoying the podcast, we'd love for you to share it with someone who might appreciate it as well. And if you are interested in working with either of the co-hosts, you can do so at their respective websites, Dr. Shalley at afccounselors.com or Dr. Kelley at inyourdreams.coach. Thanks for being here. And until next time, keep growing, stay curious, and take good care of yourself.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff.